Ladies and gentlemen, so in this next demonstration I'll be showing you how to take an ordinary block of wood, poplar wood to be exact, and turn it into the backplate of our scoop project. So there's a few different steps we're going to have to go through in order to process it and turn it into the backplate itself. So in just a short few steps here I'll show you how to do that. Take it from a scratch blank piece of wood into that U shape that we're looking for the blank, or the backplate that we're looking for. First thing we need to do is, of course, put our name on it somewhere in somehow or some way, shape, or form. So the way we're going to do that, we're going to be using these stamps over here on the left-hand side of me. But first thing, of course, you'll need one of these blanks. Now remember, your first blank that I'm supplying to you is free. If you want a replacement one, that's fine, but I can't supply them for every single person in the school. So replacement poplar wood blank is 50 cents, so just keep that in mind. Be extra careful when you're manufacturing and cutting apart all of your materials. That way you don't have to worry about replacing one in the future sometime. So back on track. So you'll need some stamps, your blank, and a hammer, a claw hammer to be exact. So first thing we need to do is grab our initials. So for me, I'll need a T for my first initial and an N for my last initial. And the proper way to use these stamps, first what we'll need to do is stand the poplar wood blank up on end so the long side is facing up towards you. Stand it up on end just like that. Take your first stamp, and the proper way to use a stamp, this little groove here on the very back side should be facing towards you at all times. That way when you stamp or put the impression on top of your piece of wood, it comes out straight. If you have it away from you on the side, left or right, it'll be sideways, or if it's away from you, it'll be upside down. So usually, as a general rule of thumb, what I like to do is take that little notch there, right on the end, at my fingertip, put my thumb over it, and have my thumb facing towards me. I'm going to go in towards the edge a little bit. I don't want it to be directly centered because we'll be stamping our initials on here as well as the year. Alright, hold it nice and steady. Make sure it's nice and centered, straight up and down. The groove is facing towards us. Take the hammer, give it a nice solid tap. After that, you should see a nice, even little impression right there, just like that. Then take your second one, do the same as well, and just repeat the same process. Alright, after that, make sure everything goes back in alphabetical order. That way it's easy to find for the next person who comes in line. So try not to keep them all scattered or spread out. After that, what we need to do is put our date on it, or the year, to be exact. So we need a 2 to start things out. Since I'm doing this video in 2017, I'll need a 2, a 0, a 1, and a 7. Leave a little bit of space between your initials and the year so it doesn't look all like jumbled up together. Same exact process, just repeat. Nice solid tap. Make sure it's facing towards you. Now some of these stamps don't have a mark on them, like a little groove. So what you might have to do is look and just make sure this thing's facing straight up and down. Facing the right way. Nice little tap like that. And finish it off with a 7. Keep it nice and centered and straight. Make sure you give it a nice solid tap. Don't be afraid to hit it. If you tap on it too lightly, then most likely it won't put a deep enough dent or impression into your wood. So just like that, that is exactly what you're looking for. So I have TN for my first and last initials, then 2017 for the year. Alright, that's knocked out of the way. Next, so after we got our initials on there, our first and last, and our year as well with the stamps, next thing we'll need to do initially is basically get the outside shape of what we want the scoop backplate to look like. So right in this little cup over here, I've stored templates. Templates, they're used to trace out the exact size and shape of whatever you're cutting or whatever you're trying to form or shape or turn into any different size or shape. So the way these work, put it on the bottom. So both of these surfaces line up, and when these two surfaces line up, that's a certain term in manufacturing and construction that's known as flush. So when you can run your finger up and down these surfaces here, and it's flush, that means it's all ready and good to go. Make sure it's nice and centered as well in between both the sides. You don't want it to be right in the middle like that, or else you'll be cutting off your initials and all the information on the bottom. So make sure it's nice and flat. You might have to tap it on the ground, pinch it flat, and hold it right on top. And run your finger left to right to make sure it's nice and flush. Take a pencil, trace around the outside shape. just like that. You could do it once, maybe twice, just to make sure. And before you move your hand, keep everything in place. Trace out that center mark as well. Put the template back, and you should have something that looks just like that right there. So half moon shape with that little dot in the center. Don't forget that dot. A lot of people accidentally forget that. That's okay though. So next thing we'll need is one of these nails here. Now, for our purposes, we're going to be using these nails as center punches, and usually a center punch is used to mark where you will be drilling. That way the drill knows exactly where to go whenever you're taking or going through the process itself. So take the nail, line it up with the center of that mark there. Pinch between your fingers, take the hammer, lightly tap it. If you hit it too hard, you might A, split the wood, or B, get the nail stuck. We just need to put a nice little mark just like that. So right there, now we're good to go. So that's exactly what you're looking for. So first step, put your initials and the year on the very bottom. Second step, trace everything out using the templates. And then the third step, mark where you're drilling with the center punch, or in this case, the small little nails, okay? Gentlemen, this machine right in front of us is known as the drill press. It's meant for drilling holes in material. It's kind of like if you've ever used maybe like a power hand drill before, a cordless, or one that has a cord on it. It's somewhat similar to that, except this obviously stays stationary in place. It doesn't really move around too easily without a bunch of people lifting it up physically and moving it around. So a couple safety rules before we start using this machine. First, if there's any ladies in the class, or if you're a lady and you're listening to this video, if you have long hair that's shoulder length or longer, tie it up so that way it doesn't get caught in the machine. We don't want that to happen. So tie that up. If you have any long sleeves, roll them up just like I have here. And if you have any like maybe necklaces or anything like hoodie strings, tuck them in or just get rid of it altogether. So first thing with the drill press. The drill press, it's meant for drilling through materials and drilling holes. Depending on the material that you're drilling through, you might have to adjust the speed setting, so the rate at which this thing rotates and turns. The way you would do that, at the top of the machine up here, let me tilt the camera a little bit so you can see. Right here at the very top, this is your speed control. So if you were drilling through something really, really hard and brittle, like plastic, you want this thing turning pretty slow. If you want to if you're drilling through something like metal that's really hard, then you want this thing to be going as quickly as possible. If you're drilling through wood, which is kind of like a happy medium, then you want it somewhere in between. This is set for wood drilling purposes, so we're going to leave it as is. The way this thing operates is you take the knobs, or these levers over here, pull them towards you, and as you can see, it moves up and down. And also, if you want to drill maybe halfway through something or the whole way through, you'd have to adjust these little stoppers on the right-hand side here, and it could either drill the whole way through an object, which is called a through hole, or you could drill halfway through the object or part of the way, which is called a blind hole, because you can only see halfway through it or through one side and not the other. Now, right now as it stands, our drill press does not have anything in it, so you can use drill bits, spade bits, Forstner bits, hole saw bits, you name it, any kind of drill bit, for the most part, will work in this drill press. So for our purposes, we're going to use a spade bit, which is flat and has a point on it. And we're going to be using 1/2 inch to be exact, because we need a 1/2 inch hole for our 1/2 inch dowel rod handle to fit right into. So the way this operates and the way you change bits out, this guy right down here, this is known as the chuck. So Chuck's job is to hold the drill bit in place so it doesn't go anywhere. Then you'll need this guy over here on the left-hand side of the machine, which is called the chuck key. So the chuck key is meant for loosening and tightening up the chuck, and you can also do it by hand to a certain extent. So what we need to do is take the spade bit, put it up underneath, then we need to start turning the chuck by hand, and what happens is there's 3 little teeth on that chuck, and as we turn it, those little teeth will start to come together and hold on to the drill bit itself. And if you turn it the opposite direction, it's the exact opposite. They start to retract and let go. Once it's hand tightened to the point where you can turn it, take the chuck key. This little cylinder here fits inside the hole, and the little teeth on the chuck key mesh up or line up with the teeth on the drill press itself. Push in, rotate, get it nice and snug. If it's too loose, the drill bit will fall out. We don't want that to happen. Take it off, put the chuck key back where it belongs. The next step, we'll be drilling a blind hole. So what we want to do is just make sure that this thing's set properly, We don't want to have an instance where you drill the whole way through your poplar wood blank. That wouldn't be good, and you pretty much ruin it. So the way you do that, and for the most part this should be set properly, but it's always a good idea to check before we start drilling. Bring this down with 2 hands, put your piece of wood right up next to it, and you should be drilling with this spade bit halfway down through the piece of wood. Right now it's not even touching the wood, it's stopping short, so we need to take these stoppers, loosen up the top one, and then just loosen up the bottom ones as well until we get to the point where they're set properly. Like I said, don't guarantee this is set properly, double check. All right, bring it down a little bit further. It goes a little bit too far, so we want to bring them down so they stop this whole entire contraption sooner. So that right there is pretty much good to go. After it's all lined up, we're pretty much all set. Usually for operating this machine, usually what I like to say is it's a two-person operation. It's just easier if you have 2 people helping, or you're doing it and you have another person helping you, like a partner. So the one person, their job will be holding this thing still. Hands on either side so it doesn't move, it stays in place. Because if you don't hold it down or clamp it down, what happens is the drill bit itself notches into the top of the wood and it becomes like a helicopter rotor blade. It starts spinning around really quick, which isn't safe at all. It's really dangerous. So make sure you're holding it down, or you clamp it down so it's just easier to grab a partner. Their job will be holding it down so it doesn't move. The other person will be in charge of turning it on, start and stop button right here. Before you turn it on, you bring it down, and both of you will have to line it up nice and straight, like so. The point will have to go with that hole we made earlier with the center punch. Then after you're ready, take it with one hand. You have the other person holding this still. You'll turn it on, drill down a little bit, let it up so the chips can clear, and just keep repeating the process until you feel this thing physically stop. You won't be able to drill any further. If you stop too short, then you wouldn't have had drilled through just quite enough. So let's go through. I'm going to do this. And since I'm more experienced than you, I'm going to hold it with one hand while I operate it with the other hand. But obviously, for your purposes, you want to have a partner helping you, since many of you haven't used one of these before. Okay, so here we go. Line it up. Nice and straight. Turn it on. Turn it on, wait for it to stop. Don't grab onto Chuck. Let him stop by himself. It will slow down. All these chips and sawdust that are left over, what I want you to do is take it on its side. Just tap it just like that. If you brush your hand over it, there's a high chance that you'll get a splinter. So just like that, we have a perfectly drilled blind hole and we're ready to go for the next step. So next step, we're going to be heading over to the scroll saw, and over at the scroll saw, we'll be cutting out this outside half moon shape. All right? Ladies and gentlemen, so this machine in front of us is known as the scroll saw. It's meant for cutting curves or circle cuts in wood, and you can even do it in plastic as well, but you never cut metal in this. It's just not set up or designed for it. So, as soon as you come up to the machine, there's a couple different things you need to do in order to adjust it so it's set up properly to start working on it and cutting. First thing you need to do, check the blade. The way you check the blade, strum it like a guitar string from the back side, and you should hear like a high pitch like ding, like a ding. If you hear that sound, that means it's good, something like this. If it sounds like a dull thud and sounds pretty loose like this, there's no like ding, that means that most likely it's loose. And if it's loose, and if you try to cut with a loose blade, most likely the thing it could break or it could fall out, either or. So we don't want that to happen. Next thing we need to do, over here, this thing right here, it's like a silver looking fork thing, is known as the hold down. It's meant to hold the piece of wood down. That way it doesn't move, vibrate up and down and shake. It makes a lot of noise if you don't adjust this properly. So the way the hold down works, this little orange knob over here, loosen it up. That way the hold down can go up and down. Put the piece of wood next to the blade, underneath the hold down. Take the handle, tighten it down nice and snug. Make sure it's nice and snug. If it's too loose, it'll actually vibrate loose and it'll start bouncing all over the place, which is not what you want. Alright, to check to see if you did it properly, you should push into it and you should feel some amount of pressure. Then the next step, we need to turn the machine on. Now, a couple tips when you're using the scroll saw. It only cuts in one direction, which is the direction the blade is facing. And if you look at the blade, it's facing back towards you. So obviously, it can't cut going sideways or backwards or diagonal or anything like that. Now, since we're cutting a curve, we want to make sure we cut on the outside of that line. Don't cut on the line. I'll say that one more time. Do not cut on the line. If we make a mistake and we cut on the line, there's no fixing it. You can't really put it back to normal. But if you cut on the outside line, if you make a mistake, you can always sand away the rest later, okay? And when you're doing this, make sure you have it flat on the table. Have one hand out here steadying it, the other hand's pushing. And when you're making your curve cut, push and slowly turn at the same time. If you just start turning, it'll take the blade, spin it, and possibly snap it, okay? As far as turning it on, over here on the right-hand side of the machine on the very front is the on switch. It's kind of like a turn dial if you have a fan in your home, or if you've ever seen like a turn dial fan type switch. So the more you turn it, the faster it goes. If you turn it on, that's a slow speed setting. The more you turn it up, like I said, the faster it goes. But obviously, the whole way up is too fast, and right here, that is too slow. Do a happy medium, which is around 1,700. So the way you can tell if it's at that point, there's a small little dot here, a black dot. If you turn it to 1,700, you should be pretty much for the most part good. So I'm gonna turn it up, make my cut, and see what happens. And if you ever make a mistake, stop what you're doing instead of cutting this thing in half and getting scared and destroying the piece of wood. I'd rather you stop and get me for help. And also, if you make a mistake, you can always back up and go over again. And when you're making your cut, don't rush through it. Take your time, make it look good, okay? So here we go. When you're done, turn it off. This little scrap piece that's left over, underneath the tables here, I have 5-gallon buckets. Take the scrap, throw it in the bucket. Please don't leave it lay on the table, okay? So that right there is exactly what we're looking for. So notice the line is still there. We didn't sand it away. It's still existing. Or we didn't cut it away, I should say. It's still there. So if you don't have any part of your line showing, or if it's not there anymore, then most likely you cut way too much material off. Okay? So the next step, we're going to go back through, fine-tune it, sand right up to that line. Okay? Gentlemen, this machine right here is known as the disc sander. It's meant for sanding, shaping, and forming wood. You only sand wood on this. You never sand metal, okay? Just for your intents and purposes and your information. So when you sand, before you start using this machine, I want you to become familiar with it. So if you're not familiar with it and if you don't know how to use it, it could be a dangerous situation. So first thing I want you to know, there's a proper way to sand and an improper way to sand. So you want to sand on the side that says yes, not the side that says stay off this side. The main reason I say that is because this thing rotates at a high speed going counterclockwise. And essentially speaking, it's a big piece of sandpaper on a wheel. That's where it gets its name, disc sander. It's a disc, or a piece of sandpaper disc on a wheel. So but back on track, since it rotates counterclockwise at a high rate, if you sand on the side that says stay off this side, it'll want to automatically pick your piece of wood up and throw it. which is really an unsafe situation. That's not safe. So when you're sanding, make sure you're on the side that says yes, because it'll want to basically sand your piece of wood, keep it flat on the table. Okay. Now besides that, keep your piece of wood flat on the table. Never hold it up in the air, or else it'll want to take your piece of wood and slam it down onto the table. It could smash or pinch your fingers. We don't want that to happen either. All right. Also, keep your fingers as far away from this crack as possible. We like to call this crack like the pinch point or the pinch zone. So keep your fingers as far away from that as possible. And also keep your fingers as far away from the disc as possible. If you accidentally touch the disc, it doesn't give you a small little cut. It sands away whatever it touches, so please be careful. Now when you're sanding, you want to keep it flat on the table, keep your fingers as far away from the object as possible. Sand in a back and forth motion. If you stay in one spot and push hard for way too long, it'll start to char and burn your wood a little bit and smell like burnt marshmallows. So make sure you're moving back and forth in the back and forth motion. You want to sand right up to the edge of the line, not sand it completely away or leave too much left over, okay? Also, make sure the vacuum hose is connected, and when you turn this thing on, turn the machine on itself, turn the vacuum on as well, or else it's like a big dust storm back here and really dirty. So the on and off switch is back here. To turn it on, you flip it up. To turn it off, you flip it down. And then once you are finished, you take your piece of wood away that you're sanding. Take this disc sander stop block, lightly sand back and forth until it stops. That's the only machine in this room that you use a piece of wood, a scrap piece of wood, to slow it down and stop it, okay? So I'll show you what that looks like right here in a few seconds. So turn it on, turn the vacuum on. Then just like that, that's exactly what you were looking for. Sanded right nice and neat, right up to that line. You don't want to sand the line away, keep it there. And notice how it's moving the whole entire time. There's no flat spots, and this thing is pretty much all ready to go for the next step. So the last and final thing we need to do to complete our backplate, we're almost done. We laid everything out, we drilled our blind hole in the drill press, and then we just came off of cutting it with a scroll saw for our overall shape, and then we also went through and sanded right up to that line with the disc sander. So the next step is basically finishing this thing off with some sandpaper, because as it stands, it's not quite finished. There's still some refinement and things to fine tune. So if you look closely, like on the back side of this thing, there's some fuzzies left over from when we were sanding. So the proper way to get rid of that is some sandpaper. So the way we're going to use the sandpaper, we're going to start with the medium. The medium is over here in the cabinet behind me on the very bottom right, and it's in the blue container. We're going to go over the entire thing with medium. Get rid of these fuzzies, break down the edges so they're not sharp, and get rid of these points as well. Sand everything, okay? Then after we're done with the medium, we do the same exact thing with the fine, and the fine should go a little bit faster, okay? So go around the edges, sand it down, get this thing completely smoothed out. You can either use the sandpaper that's attached to the blocks, or you can use the sandpaper that's just loose by itself in the boxes themselves. It really doesn't matter. So go all around this entire thing, clean it up, make it look really nice. And after you think you're done, bring it to me. I'm going to look over it just to make sure you're on the right track. And one thing a lot of people always forget on the very top here is the pencil line. So sand that away. It will come off. Just spend a little bit of time going over it on the very top and the edges, okay? So sand it in, rough it in, get it all nice and cleaned up. Shouldn't be any rough edges. Sand all the sides and surfaces as well, like I said. And really fine tune it. The more time you spend on it, the nicer it looks, and obviously the better your grade will be for this portion of your scoop. Okay, so that's done. Go over to the fine, repeat the same process over again, sand it over. A lot of people are always like, well, Mr. Nicholas, how smooth should you make this thing? Usually what I like to say is as smooth as a piece of glass, and you should all know like how smooth a piece of glass is when you run your finger over top of it. So go over it, really work with it. Get the thing nice and smoothed out. Get it looking nice. And there will be a huge obvious difference for the parts that you did sand, especially with fine, and the stuff that you did not sand with fine. Same thing with medium as well. Alright, then there you have it. You're pretty much all done with this part of your project.